Good evening to everyone. Welcome again. We have a very interesting and dense program of conferences. And this evening we have invited Luca Pitoni. He is a designer specialized in magazine and publishing design. And he is also a teacher in SPD. Of him, you know for sure the work he has carried out and made him made very popular in the field of Italian design, which is the project that he has carried out for Il. When Il was launched for the first time, he has worked for the Sole 24 Ore, the newspaper. He has worked for the Sunday issue of it. And recently he has worked as an art director of the edition San Paolo. Well, and I believe it's what in particular he will talk about today. Well, for the questions, do you prefer they ask you throughout the conference or at the end? Okay, it's up to you. So just prepare your questions. And the Edizioni San Paolo, it's a reality which is very Italian, and it's very interesting to understand the challenge for a person like with the experience of Luca to have a project and carry on a project which is so complex with the tools which are so unconventional. Thank you very much, and see you later. Good evening. Well, in reality, this time I have accepted because the opportunity, I believe, was very interesting not to speak about these three projects that I will explain to you tonight, but it's actually different. I want to speak about a design approach that has been, what Sylvia has said, a challenge, an incredible challenge for me and a personal challenge, definitely, because I found myself catapulted by the Sole 24 Ore, Confindustria, a world which is particular but normal actually, to the Edizioni San Paolo. Therefore, a Catholic editor and publisher, very strong. They have these names like Jesus. And of course, it's pretty fun because in reality, when it was proposed to me, I asked myself several questions on what a graphic designer would do. I had experiences of magazines already, but the field is definitely very particular. And this challenge, I believe, was very interesting for this reason, for the religious reason. Well, as you see, these three stories of design and tailoring. Tailoring for which reason, aside from the initial presentation on the theme, well, this, I believe it's very adequate because the great opportunity as of a single magazine and of something that was definitely very strange for Italy, and therefore this group has been very, very clear, and a new renewal and redesign of certain magazines. And one of the weekly that are the most ancient of Italy. Well, the idea has been the opportunity that of designing in a tailored manner, very precise, very detailed, very linked to the single projects and the reality of the publisher, and redesign, give a visual form to a small universe as I have intended it. And I do believe that it's a bit idealistic, and for sure, all this year and a half of work where we have published 6 magazines. I will show you only 3, which are the most close to the Catholic and religious topic. And I have tried throughout this year to convince people that it was possible to have a beauty in this world, not because the result is beautiful, but actually that the method is actually that of a graphic designer, the professional of the graphic design sector. And therefore, in this world where objectively it is not so much beautiful, actually, so much beauty. Well, said this, I was at the real beginning a bit confused, and these are the dogs of Mario Prazza. They were a bit doubtful, just as I were, when the CEO, Maurizio Dadda, said, "Why don't you come from the Sole 24 Ore? You leave your marvelous experience." I was happy. I was in a newspaper, very big, a challenge that was very interesting, and you start designing some religious popular magazines. Well, religious magazine, it's already complex. Popular in beauty, I mean, this is a mega challenge. Also because these are also magazines that I have designed, like Il, which has, it's an insert to a newspaper. You can afford very many things which are very beautiful, and you do not have the challenge of the market of itself. These are actually magazines that are, if you have them in mind, they are actually very particular in terms of the communicative strength. Well, they have proposed me one thing, and I immediately said no. I'm a brag sometimes, and I said, well, okay, listen, I want to supervise the work, and then we will do some external projects. You can tell me if you like them or not. You can say beautiful or not. And I actually not so concerned with the thing, because mine is a true challenge. I really want to redesign this magazine, so I propose this small thing. I speak about this part less of the project, because actually it's the most interesting, and very many students and very young ones here, and therefore I think it's the most interesting. I said, okay, I'm the art director. Well, these projects will have to be directed directly by me, because every single project here, you see the 3 projects elaborated with different collaborators, that they will work here with me for 3-6 months or whatever we will need to finish a project. Some were very elaborate, and of course who works in this field knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I have brought this red dot, which was my style, which has varied in time, definitely. This style in each one of the project, and therefore the style of the editor, and not my own personal style, but the style I thought was correct, this mood, this series of elements that could actually work for this editor in each one of these projects. Well, not only doing 3 projects that were my own, but with 3 designers that are very different, with professional experiences chosen for these specific projects, that could actually contribute to give something new every time, but giving the image of the editor, which was then guaranteed by my intervention and my support. I have worked here with Matteo Dell'Orlio for Plume, for Credere, and then Mauro Bubigo, an extraordinary designer, and Giacomo Tralli for Famiglia Cristana concept, which was definitely more requiring, and then only with Giacomo that now he is internal for our magazine, for Jesus, which is the last project. Well, the idea was actually this one, the following, well, that of redesigning, turn upside down these objects as I see them. I mean, I am not very religious. I wasn't really concerned with religion at all, and at the real beginning I was involved with all this terminology in a world that it's 2,000 years old, and it was very challenging, and I just wanted to revolutionize it. I'd give it a new shape, bring a new attitude towards it, and trying to understand what we could actually do with this theme of the sacred. Well, what we could do also with this other theme, which is the popular, the pop. Well, there are 3 just comments in this, and they all come from a book of Joe Ponti, Love Architecture. Well, you vulgarly say by the eye to say approximation, but it's a mistake. The true exactness is that of the eye. The other is that of the non-artist. The non-artist draw a line and it's a curve. The artists of the Parthenon have rather inflexed a curve and a line that was exact for the eye. I really like this quote for a theme of this kind of the pop, because, well, just doing things by your eye, and therefore it's I hate to be very precise, mathematical, very, very exact, because they're not correct, they're not functional. And by saying ad occhio in Italian means just by the eye, something can be perfectly beautiful without having a designer involved. The trial was that of doing the opposite, designing something that could actually seem just done by your eye. Well, without any measurements. Who has done something interesting that is very close to me and that could be a reference point for me, adequate for this magazine, especially for the first magazine that we had to face as soon as I started this job, which was Credere. And I thought of this extraordinary work of Matisse, where he has designed an entire chapel, where he has frequently designed portraits, mosaics, and also the sacred elements where you see here a revolution of senses. It doesn't really seem an outfit of a priest. This is magenta. It's a ritual color. Okay, it's sacred. Everything is very precise. Everything is very correct. You may use it, but it's extraordinary, artistic, extraordinarily new. And then I thought of something else. Well, this is a very extreme case. It's very, very modern and of revolution. And this is a very, very classic element, which for us it's a monument of the Western painting. But it's nothing else but like a cartoon strip. This is very, very simple. I'm di Padova, di Assisi, of Giotto. Well, these are frescoes which are super popular in the color and the shapes and the type of narration. And I really like this. They're popular but extremely beautiful, and they can be seen with an eye which is profane and also very culturally elevated in two different ways. They both work though. And for here we started to design these famous 3 tailored garments. Well, all 3 with a thought that was initially very hard, and after this year and a half I'm so tired because every moment of the design, every single object, I tried to actually draw the strings of all this, which was very complex to have tons of meetings, 1,000 other projects and 1,000 other things. Creating an idea of a family San Paolo. Credere, I called it The Adolescent because it's a new magazine. It did not exist, and therefore it was a double challenge. It was a magazine of religiousness and faith, popular, with the first issue was 200,000 copies, and the idea of being 100,000 copies. And this is a very high numbers, okay, to launch a magazine in 2014. And the other 2, and therefore trying to come up with who were the members of which family. Jesus, it's a very high-end magazine. It's dealing with philosophy, dealing with the priest, the church, and it's a 30-year-old. I mean, it's extremely less party because the Catholic Church is divided more than the left party in Italy, and therefore it has a cut that and it has an edge that the other 2 cannot afford. And Famiglia Cristiana, I'm sure you all know, I mean, he's like the first member of the family, the father. This is the first issue. We're speaking about this kind of magazine. I mean, it's and of course it has a past and glorious, and it's famous to 2 million copies, and it has to be treated with an approach that it's given by the respect of something that has a story and an identity. Well, furthermore, the division of these 3 members of the family of this group, well, in reality they act in worlds that are semantically different. Also in terms of marketing, they're unfortunately very different. In a scale, in a ranking, which is the most popular, the lowest, the simplest, to Famiglia Cristiana, and then there's a very big gap between Jesus, which is a totally different magazine, as I was telling you. And the result is this. Well, it was very, very hard after 1,500 meetings trying to convince them that in my mind I wanted to take all these steps and put these pieces of the mosaic, and I was designing like this path that lasted 1 year and a half because they were not steps that were made contemporaneously, but actually one at a time. And every meeting I tried to make sure that things were happening the way I wanted them to give a sense to all this, and not to do something that was like a bazaar of different projects, but actually do something that had inside a new San Paolo identity, and I also hope a possible identity of the Catholic world. Well, this is the complete result. We see the 3 cover pages, and this is more or less what has happened. Well, once again, Joe Ponti, a quote from him. I was finally on the best path, and I started understanding that we had to start an artwork from its substance, an internal construction, independent for any aesthetics. Construction that has matured, producing exact, realistic, clear, and simple. Well, he speaks about architecture, but the boundaries are definitely very, very not so strict and very liable. And what I am concerned with is actually not this, which is the aesthetic result, but I'm actually concerned with the process and the reasons why we have this result. And the research through these projects, and thanks to the designers that have collaborated with me, was that of finding the correct project, the one that had a meaning, not the beautiful one, not the one I liked aesthetically. Well, let's reach the projects as of themselves. Credere, the small toddler of the family. Well, actually, all the projects that I present, we start from some images because these have been some inspirations that actually draw the strings of this entire world, the artistic world. The church has been the greatest mecenate of art, and therefore, of course, we have to thank them because I had an incredible archive of images, and this is one of my favorite artworks, Leo Battista Alberti, in Florence, and it's a small temple. And extremely extraordinary according to thousands of points of view. We could spend a whole day to speak about this element because there's an entire geometry of the construction of the letters, of those squares, of those symbols, and they are the first like trademarks of history. It's a small object full of history, and it's an object that has instaurated a method of design, of pages, of shape, and this square, this rigor, this classicism or neoclassicism, like in this case. And on the other side, this here, it's the scandal. Well, and Giotto says pop and incredibly indecisive, and he says that there is this kiss which are revolutionizing the soul and the secret of this painting. The trial was that of combining these things. And we did not have any reference. It was very, very hard to work like this because this was like a prairie, actually. It was an open field. There were no magazines around Europe like these, simply religious and, totally religious and totally popular. And therefore, they have been a bit similar and of this kind. And we tried to understand this kind of magazine of religiousness and popular that the director, the editor, and the administrator proposed. And we tried to understand Nascere, Credere, with painterly and linked to an iconography which was religious and the world of the popular magazines of the 50s, the great Italian period of the magazines. And therefore, giving a cut of this thing, interpreting these two basins and sources that had so much information with this cut of polyedric and aesthetic confusion and pastiche. Look at this wall where there are expos, Virgin Mary's, frescoes, anything. And like in these photos, I mean, these are extraordinary if you do not know these, because definitely they're so fascinating visually and so fresh and so modern. And on the other side, the classic iconography, the one that it's definitely mandatory, because of course I was speaking with a director, which was a priest, and is a priest, and of course a research on colors, the styles, and everything that could be correct. And on the other side, what I was saying, the pop, right? What is pop not of modern people, but people of the past, but still living today. And I mean, they were extraordinary. And of all these other magazines that in the feel of the time were very, very fascinating. They had this strength, this communication, colors that were so simple and strong. These very beautiful magazines of the 50s and 60s. Well, from this pastiche of elements, well, we did a pastiche, which is like a sort of palette, actually, because I started working with editors and graphic designers that were working there since 20, 30 years and professional situations that were all very different. I tried to do like 3 sets of elements and supply 3 different ideas of project that could actually be understood by the journalist. They were like some Lego kits. And with Matteo, we have worked with all these elements that could actually construct a palette with which one could actually play with. They originate from architecture, Alberti, churches, and that world. And all these elements are all part of the unity, the heart, the core of the magazine, the sort of nerve that holds it together with the typography and colors. Well, of course, it would have become a magazine that's very, very serious and rigorous, very beautiful, but this was not the objective and is not the objective of the magazine, and therefore we have added elements of rhythm that have created different narrative rhythms that we could see visually, and we will look at them now. I will go faster now, and we can talk about the typography and therefore the choice, of course, of a font and an incision on wood, the vernacular writing with a great series and mess of typographies, series of elements that could mix themselves together to create that mess that is coordinated. In a trial of being redundant and, in this sense, popular. A visual palette that did not want to yell to people, because this is my daily challenge with the editor, and I keep on constantly argue with him, and they say that we're not popular and we haven't done a popular magazine, but it's this theme, the theme of not yelling, the theme of having chosen a palette of colors, shapes and structures and pages, layouts that would never yell, that had to be, of course, incisive, strong, like those magazines of the 50s, without actually yelling with those two opulent colors and those magazines that are intended by everyone as really popular. Well, these are the structures, a small summary of the structures of the narrative structures applied to the narrative, to the journalist, and in order for every issue to work, this is a weekly magazine, therefore it's an incredible challenge, and every issue has to keep in mind this great variety, and therefore moving from the news, agenda, reportage, photo narration, the notepad, the comic strip, being a newspaper in some way, the book, the novel, and the vox populi, and therefore the classic interview on street. Well, actually, this has been in the issue number 0, these kind of elements. You see the first image on the left side is the classic photo, black screen, writing over the pictures. The 50s write the interview on the street, trying to narrate the Bible with comic strips. This 32 issues on Padre Pio's story. There's the people who have really done this. I mean, the graphics of Credere. And here, the notepad of the journalist, and to have a central dossier, which is like a small book in the magazine, like that would detach the attention. And all these have been given to the journalist as examples of narrative structures to manage their themes. Well, actually, this is the result. At the end, we will see several images to understand how this object works. And this is, of course, paper, the format, the fact of not being too strong. If you have in mind the magazines that have originated, like Miracoli, well, they're big formats, very big pictures, very big, and they satinated and polished paper. Here we were yelling less. We were more intimate, but popular at the same time. And here we see all in these pages applied all the composition of elements, which are some pieces of Lego applied in various shapes. Here in the classic magazines, in like a double page, very normal. Here in a photographic element, a bit more interesting, with some narrations which are a bit different. The elements are the same of the popular. And yelled, and here the treatment, the visual treatment, that movement that we try to have, which is slightly different and underestimated, and register that is more designed in some way. And here a series of elements from Alberti, the churches that compose themselves and start creating the pages and the various solutions, and more extreme, like turning the magazine for this and vertical, that has cost us so many meetings to obtain this result. And in more classic cases, like here, the magazine's just ranges in terms of typography, in terms of elements. It has great variations throughout. Well, here the theme of the square is incredible, because here, of course, in the first issues, the project wanted to have an imprint and wanted to give the publishing team an imprint, and we had forced some geometries that gave a clear imprinting that was actually a guideline for the future. And then a series of different other elements which are common for these three projects, that I believe in some cases efficient, in some cases less, but definitely very important in an editor, which are elements that we call them for beautiful pictures. They are elements that reinforce, give sense, and move the meaning of certain pictures in order for them to give them more important, enhance them. These are small aesthetic, like frames, for example. These touches actually give us the variation of these pictures. These are pictures that they're not, of course, it's not Condé Nast, okay? We have the classic pictures of the mission in Africa, and of course we cannot spend 1,000 euros to then take those like pictures which are glamorous, right? These are those elements that try to narrate with those materials that we have, which are not always so beautiful, that the majority of the times are not these glamorous pictures of scarce quality in terms of resolution or in terms of quality of aesthetics. Well, here classically it's the density. There is no space. Sometimes, the layout, we were aiming on all these elements and these overcrowding in the pages, which are actually classic of the red label magazines, which are very pop, and they are reinterpreted with these shapes that we were speaking. This is the idea of the book in the book, the narration of a central dossier. Here, once again, the approach was that of how illustrating it, well, with artworks, but how can they become pop and just mistreating them in some way, and doing these like games and play with the images that actually bring this into a more ironic layout, and we can actually appreciate some details that can become new artworks, new interpretation of the narration of the project. Here, the photo reportage, well, elements which are more classic, the trial of illustrating stories for children, a part which is very, very serious, with 12 pages at least of guidelines to the liturgic week, with some technical elements and change of color and different kinds of problematic of classic magazines, the prayers, wherein sometimes we had fun with the layout here. And the photo reportage here once again, and the photo narration on the these captions over the images, and all this world of the iconographic here, the religious iconography. Well, and it's a magazine that uses the illustrated image with, of course, some things that are very, very different from what we're used to. There's no Victorian, there is the Aquarello and technique. There's a series of people that illustrate this magazine, which are not the mainstream that you can actually use, because the type of approach is totally different. Let's do a high-end intermediate. Let's speak about Jesus and then go to Famiglia Cristiana. Well, the trial here has been this, basically to try to push things to the maximum extent. We're speaking and addressing a target which is more sophisticated. We have 15,000 copies, different type of marketing for the editor here. And here we have tried to move the magazine that was this thing here, a magazine that was religious, that speaks about reportage around the world, and therefore it wants to make a simplification, like a Catholic traveler, basically, and this, we wanted to shift the balance in a more ironic manner. This image tries to make you understand it's one of those classic cool stores that are a bit hipster upstream now, and that have this mood which is very, very contemporary, to which I would, of course, not want to aim usually a magazine which is religious, but I actually thought it was cool to do something like this in terms of shapes and references. Well, we had some pages which were extraordinary, like those of Domus, like a trial of being very subtle in the shapes, a lot of white, totally the opposite of what we have seen up to now, with a lot of refraction and trying to have the same exact content, because in this case it was just a redesign. We already had the magazine Jesus, but the same issues, the same articles, the same journalists. The trial was that of just redesigning it, the internal shape, the layout, and not the aesthetics, simply. This is what we saw with Joe Ponti, in fact, with his quotes, and with a mood that's totally contemporary, and seeing how the magazines today are absolutely those of independent magazines. And this is absolutely like a quote of different elements and a citation of a field that it's totally different, to create like this sort of visual misunderstanding, where the classic elements are here, but we have a literal element, the magazine, and sometimes it's a book, it's a monthly magazine, the other two are weekly, and therefore it has a totally different kind of work dealt with. And this another element, like a fil rouge, like the famous red dot that I'm in all the projects that I said at the beginning. Well, these retro elements, like an old font of Butti redesigned, the Vendôme, some fonts that are pretty old, as the editor intends it, or vintage, as we could say, which actually go and create these elements of coordination in the project of the editor, because each of these magazines have some small element of coordination through which the color red, since it's a very popular editor, the red is his color. It's a standard and it's international. Well, this is the result, and the result moves the magazine in terms of paper. Well, it's normal freehand paper and very, very contemporary. The approach to the layout and pages is more sophisticated, more complex. Here, the text, there's no colors, images, or shapes, but actually it's a layout and balance of the whites. And here it's all a matter of balancing out the whites, actually, in this magazine. It works a lot with the text, of course. It's a magazine for people who really read the magazines and not just skim through and look at them. Maybe, I don't know. I hope they read them, actually, because well, just different trials of creating a different layout, a certain kind of simplicity, because here we're actually trying to face a practical issue. As an editor and an art director, I have to solve some problems. It's three people who are very good, but that work also to another magazine. This is like a second job for them, like a... Of course, this is not the maximum thing. We would want full-time people, but actually if it has a DNA and a simplicity, an execution of structure and the layouts, in Credere we have tons of different elements that are one over the other, overlapping. Here there are very few that are creating and building themselves slowly. Here, once again, different trials of enhancing different elements. They are elements of union between the various projects and enhancement and evaluation of images that are not actually always those of a glamorous magazine. Well, here it's a classic book, the frame, the picture, right, on the left, the text, on the facing page. Well, here the classic book, the reading and the pleasure of reading. Well, this is the initial part where there is just like small elements coming from all over the world, divided by the different continents. Here there's pieces that are the simplicity of the execution of the project becomes then a style for the layout. You start from a technical problem and then you obtain an aesthetic and design objective. a part of different letters. Here there are fragments. There's a more modern synthesis, Teresa Stralec, which is very, very good, who has worked with these icons, a totally different approach. And we finish with the last challenge, which would have killed the most courageous and brave. And I almost felt like collapsing after several trials, drafts, changes of project, and extenuous meetings. It was the magazine for that editor. And in Italy, it's a very important magazine, and it was an incredible challenge. And I really felt the challenge. And of course, they were coming from different changes of editors, different changing of, it was a magazine that originates as, here it says, for women and families, this, so there was crochet and cooking classes, and then at the end of the 90s it was a news magazine like Panorama Espresso type thing, and then it was trying to recycle itself in the great pop magazines like Gente and Oggi. Well, it's a historical armed magazine, basically, just that changed throughout in time. The first approach, which was the less interesting in terms of design, but what we actually needed to maintain a structure was what I called the mini approach. Well, actually changing everything for not changing anything, basically. Well, it was a problem of the editor. They wanted everything totally new and everything had to be identical to before, and my trial was just slowly try to move them with very long and incredible discussions and arguments towards something new that always appears to be that element. And then the most interesting part, which was the funnest one actually, which has been the great part carried out by Mauro Bugo in this project, which was the fascinating world of the vernacle. Here we see the papers of orange that cover oranges, the fruit, and this presentation that has gone, which is an old manifesto of a Milanese billboard. All that word of designing, not designed by professional, which is extremely fascinating and extremely popular. This is the theme, in fact. Here we see the first issue of Famiglia Cristiana in 31. And here we see the evolution. See, we started all the opposite. There are no reference, as we have seen in the other presentations, but we have actually started from a very connotating element. We were speaking about history and the heritage, what is more important, the name and the shape of the header. And in 90 years, we realized that they say you cannot touch the name, of course. I mean, the header, we cannot touch it. The title, we will sell less copies. And it had changed millions of times throughout the years. See, every decade, this had the header and the title changed. They renewed the La Famiglia Cristiana, and then it became Famiglia Cristiana with a frame, without a frame, white without white, cut in half. And the last is the project. And it changed 1,000 times. Therefore, this was our demonstration to start from the project of the title and working with that title, and then to demonstrate that it had to be changed. Changed, not to change anything. And then once again, to maintain ourselves in the heritage and the identity of this magazine. And we started from this magazine that I believe it's so beautiful. It's like 20 years with no titles. So beautiful. Incredible photos. One so beautiful looking at the archives. It's incredible. It's a blast. And with a taste that it's so retro with this typography, which is definitely interesting. It reminds us Tempo, Oggi, those magazines of the 50s. That has had some small modifications here throughout. It lost the black, it acquired it, and then there's birds there, and a bit of everything happens in the title here. And we have obtained this result. After 1,000 meetings, we finally had all the editors approve this. Everyone liked this. I can't find out why. And it has produced a font and the possibility of using this font. And therefore, the idea that I was the manager of this process that can actually bring the editor to have a small patrimony of elements to be used throughout the various solutions that we needed. And this is the result. Here we have worked with several pop elements with great simplicity, working with elements of overwriting of a magazine that has its cage and it has its grid, and we have supplied the graphics some grids that are very, very rigid, but on these there's like a second level, which is the pop level, the yelling titles with these cover pages, with these colored elements that write over the magazine, that write and talk about it, give another level, another layer. And they are the heart of this project, the core of this magazine, the trial of speaking, the possibility of speaking about various themes like Famiglia Cristiana, speaking about Syria, Bagnasco, and any other element, giving also this different level and these layers that would make them more pop and have it like a different theme. The heart of the problem was this. Basically, the magazine, in its beauty or in its ugliness of the project that I was carrying out, well, it had a problem: chaos. Chaos. They were nice or ugly elements, and these were the elements, and they had to remain. And I wanted them to become like this, reaching this linearity, doing a magazine that it was more modern, simple to understand, with the same elements. And therefore, the great work in reality, besides this structural element, which is general, was working on the 1,000 issues of this magazine and 180 pages full of different kinds of themes throughout. And the work was really that, like working as a carpenter in all the small elements to keep all these elements together. Here there's a very more important word, which is popular, and the challenge was that, and in fact, what I'm very concerned with is all this habit, basically, which is this thing. This is one of the main characters of the different Famiglia Cristiana, of the new Famiglia Cristiana. It's a font that you find everywhere. You find it everywhere. It's a Britannic. You find it, it's interesting with this sans and serif. It's an in-between the two. It has no graces, and it's a font that everyone uses, the Chinese, the box, the fit, and whatever, the renting, like posters and billboards. It's the antithesis of Helvetica in terms of diffusion and font, and it has this very popular connotation typical of bars, sandwich bars. In these months I found it everywhere. Giacomo and I now, where we take these pictures to the Britannic all over the world. Wherever we travel, we found Britannic everywhere in Germany, Austria, Sicily, everywhere. Everything for bar, like cafes and so on. Well, this habit, the fact of showing something to the editor, the public, the readers, a magazine that looks like their magazine, something that's not bothering them. Famiglia Cristiana goes all around the Italian province, people who are 60 and over that are not very educated, and they need to know the visual code. If everything is new, everything needs to remain the same, or they will get lost. And these are elements of, the font, the magazine is very complex, but these are only elements that I'm showing you. And all managed in this very pop manner. This looks like a special offer, sales discount, and the content are totally different. And therefore, this is the trick, basically. The saint popes, you should write it differently. I wouldn't really start like that, to write about the saint and the popes. They have started like this before I did, and I just played studying the past issues. These were the 50s, and here there's a lot of pop, and it's pretty fun, and there is also a certain type of typographical sensitivity because the Catholic world has had a lot of training in schools, and therefore the theme of typography is theirs, and slowly it's diluted in time, and we have done nothing else than taking these examples and transpose them in our project, readapt them, remanage them, redirect them in some way. And you do see the font, which is condensed in the historical example right here, all the elements of the headers and the first letter, and every issue had these newborn babies. Well, every time realized by the graphic of the time in a different way. Small collages, handmade with rhombuses, pentagons, prisms, any kind of shape that you could imagine. It was used in this beautiful page with a refinedness that was incredible. Here, these elements that are just quotes and popular elements on which this element of juxtapose over the images, elements that appear to be very, very modern, and here having different geometric shapes. One of the most important element, which is this element of narration, where you see an original page here. The patterns of pattern makers for like from Paris, that's fantastic. Like these stickers that were placed on top of the images and on the graphic of the magazine. In a certain way, they attract and popular. And here, once again, we go into the visual narration of the result. And this is not just by chance. He is the founder of the San Paolo Association. And in this vintage image, it originates with the diffusion through the press, the videos, the audio, and the message of its founder. And this image recuperates all the tradition and closes a circle, basically, narrating in a contemporary manner, because the importance of all this thing is finding a system of narration and not the result of the single page, but actually a great publishing editor that can scout this system. Well, this is a magazine that it's yelled, the titles are much stronger. It gives more strength to the visual strength of the image, but there's a cleanness as a basic layer. And it always plays with the shapes, which are some visual escamotage to narrate in a different manner and nostalgic without exceeding in extravagance or in styles which were very classic. But actually, the ugly photo, as I say, always ends up in these strange shapes that actually evaluates it, that makes it look more beautiful and more researched. More classic solutions of openings and different shapes of writing. I hate to write on the pictures, but actually a popular magazine has to do this. A pop magazine needs to find some systems to write on the pictures. That these writing are very important, actually. Here, once again, trying to give some formats. This is a format that everyone forgets and say, that format with Prandelli. Well, actually, the idea of doing some titles that are not necessarily a title, but could be the name, and some formats that actually can be journalistic, because it's very important that a magazine, especially a weekly, to maintain active and alive and dynamic the project. Well, to have this work, we need to supply some journalistic formats of layout, not of aesthetic solutions, but some narration solution, because the theme of a magazine is that of narrating, not doing anything else. Stronger solutions. The theme, of course, changes. The magazine changes. We're not only speaking about religion, and it's hard to keep together these visual contexts, which are very, very different. I must say that the beauty of this magazine, strangely in Italy, in a photographic point of view, while it's almost all produced, shot exclusively for Famiglia Cristiana. We photograph everything, and this is pretty rare, actually, and very fascinating in terms of approach. And here in Sardinia, there's been a flood. All these pictures taken for Famiglia Cristiana purposely. New elements. See how all these stickers and elements and frames all try to narrate and give an easier reading to everything. Here, how they design the layout. And these are people of the TV, and therefore we have rounded the image and solutions that I can actually put together 2, 3, 4 pictures, a series of X combinations that are supplied to solve some interesting and propose some interesting solutions and solve some issues. With some elements that are, as you can see, those of a newspaper, the personal and professional examples of working in a newspaper, because now when I do a magazine, I'm sort of obsessed these blocks, elements, Legos that I can put together in 1,000 different combinations, because a newspaper is done this way, and therefore it's managed by hundreds of people, and the pieces have to work perfectly and have to match just like in a puzzle, and therefore or else in the evening you'll never shut down. Once again, shapes, narration, more pop. And then this magazine, we yelled incredibly and yelled what we wanted to say, but there's a formal cleanness and neatness. And solutions like these, a magazine like this with so much advertising, we have to work on the single individual pages. Before they didn't do it, and we tried to do it in this project, trying to work on the single page to open this magazine. And in the editor, they called it the round Pitoni, the circle Pitoni. This is, I save any situation with a round in the circle, and therefore these allow to win over the advertising on the facing page. A selection of these elements that narrate the pop level of the magazine in each part of the magazine. Here and in classic parts, here we're narrating the service. The magazine has a great selection and a great part of service areas, which are at the beginning, at the end, like in every magazine. In this case, there are very many and very numerous and various and different one from the other, and I had to find a solution that could actually work and were not tiring in these 50 issues a year. And this is the photo reportage applied in 3 different solutions, and therefore in terms of designer and together with all the rest of the team, the difficulty of finding new solutions for one unique problem, 3 different solutions, totally different, that could all work with the same magazine. There's fashion, of course. There's a bit of everything. This is like a magazine that don't really work now because there's a bit of everything now. They're super specialized, all magazine, and not like these that talk a bit of everything. Once again, some other elements, some other themes, color that I haven't illustrated because it's not the part which is the most interesting, but all that part of color holds together and narrates, especially to the reader, that helps him understand in which part of the magazine he's at and the structure of the magazine. It's evident. And this is the reason for why everyone remembers Famiglia Cristiana, the next to last page. I wanted, it's one of the challenges that I've lost, well, the facts of the day, and therefore an event which is tragic and comic because there's pictures are not used, but with this style which is painterly and it narrates a container falls over the car and the 2 passengers are unharmed, and this is reinterpreted by this new graphics. Well, I have spoken enough. Well, a quote of Ponti, just to close this evening's speech. Architecture is a conditioned art, and the contractor is one of the authors. This is a very important sentence, especially if you're working in magazines. I need to thank those that have allowed me to have this project be possible. Some of them are here tonight, and the editor, the general director, who actually have helped me, and they are the contractor. They have made some strategic choices that I have just created the tailored dress for, and that have given a sense to everything we have seen, and they have allowed this path. That's all. Thank you for the patience. The objects are here, meaning the magazines, if you want to take a look at them. I mean, it's not so easy. There will be some questions, I'm sure. Is there anyone who has some questions, curiosities on the projects that have been some questions to ask? I have some, but I want to ask you first and give space to you guys first. Okay, let me start. You have said so many things about these projects, but I believe potentially there's much more to know and find out of these, of course. Well, since you have mentioned this very important thing of the contractor at the end, well, actually, it's a while that you started this collaboration with them, more than 1 year, right? How long did it take to, like, feel at ease and start all this machine and this engine to produce these results? How long did it take you to actually feel at ease with everyone and all the other people to actually manage to find the correct approach to work with a contractor of this nature? Well, it's very different in reality because the three projects are very different one from the other. And of course, what has been Jesus chronologically has been the last, and it has been the easiest actually because I was in a mechanism that had some styles, some approaches of the various journalists that was very particular and their world that I have understood clearly, and therefore it was easier. In reality, the first project, Credere, had a pretty quick and speedy and in this art and architecture world, well, it was pretty easy for us as designers. It was pretty spontaneous to find a visual element, and then it was a challenge rather to convince them that that was an element that was correct for them. Because honestly, seeing this from internally, this was definitely like a very strong approach to the magazine, like a figure of the art director, and accept a figure of this kind, a professional role, like a daily work that comes from the organized world of the newspapers, which has been very, very hard for them to understand, and the visual element has been much easier. And they, at the real beginning, they were not so friendly with this kind of approach, but then they have approached these three projects. And I must say that I'm very thankful to these people who have then appreciated our work. And I'm very surprised that they have accepted some projects that are so different from the general panorama of the Catholic, theme. And there are three projects that definitely were cutting, from their past and moving on to a new future. And in fact, I'm also concerned to understand what are the topics that work. Well, the contractor is always the director of each magazine, or well, strangely, there is an interesting figure, which is the editor director. He's the general director. Basically, he carries out a role which is like that of a publisher, more than just a general director that you have in other places. All these magazines have like a magazine director. In all three the cases, there are actually two. There are priests. And I mean, they're all masked as normal people. They're not really, they have no clergymen, but they are priests. And this director is not, of course, religious, and he is like controlling and making sure that everything works in the design, but in daily life he's always the director who decides, and every case is of course a different solution, and being these tailored, they've been tailored also for the director, because the task of a graphic designer is that to make sure that the his project works and lasts in time and lasts for an interesting time. That definitely has to be kept on the human working force that understands what the director wants, and making sure that Mauro Gubico and Giacomo, we have applied a maiotic element, which was that of making sure that we were proposing, discussing, and showing them in an approach that's not usually. These are some tailored elements that originated from inside. And therefore, you are still working with these strategic projects, or you're just now... It's a month time, actually, that I finished these mega projects, and now I could relax. And I'm just keeping together, like the strings of everything. There are other projects that will... start, and the idea is to keep these things together and keep these elements, and my effort is making sure that everything keeps on going and works in that same way, without making sure that the train keeps on going on track. Giovanni Anceschi. Well, I don't ask you a question, but I want to just make a comment in consideration. I heard you say very frequently, speaking about pop. I must say, though, that I would give you a greater compliment what you have reached and what you have done through this complex direction, like third or whatever, triple or and what you have reached through this fact that we are putting together a multiplicity. And what was very useful to see throughout your presentation, you have spoken about Lego and pieces put together, but all these things, all these pieces of the puzzle, of these mosaic, produce something very original, very, very new. I wouldn't say pop. Then, of course, if you want to say pop, say pop. I mean, but there's more than that. I say there's more than that. The image that turns out and the resulting image is plural. It has so many ingredients in it. I like it very much. Besides this, thank you very much. I'm honored. Of course, yes, it was the theme of this year and a half, pop, popular, wherever you want to call it, because the editor was insisting on this, and it was very, very hard to understand what he meant, because it's a term that means and has meant in art history and cultural, sociologically, so many different things, and therefore it's almost a non-term. And therefore, I had to think, and I twisted my mind and my brain, and I didn't sleep for days to understand what I had to do and what Joe Punti meant with having a path. Well, the polyhedricity of the multiplicity of these different approaches with different styles and stimuli, well, has been a trial of doing something with very many elements so different that would speak of like Italy in general. Yes, of course. Yes, yes, yes. I cannot say that, but I do not want to speak about my works. Yes, the objective was that to be modern and yes, and even more maybe. Contemporary. Yeah, it is. It is, of course. Okay, good. Basta.
Hi. I have this more like a technical question because to me one of the main issue when you work for an editorial project is the cooperation between the art director and then the editor. How do you compromise the art part and then the writing the text part and in these project that you have done. How did you can you can you tell us some tricks that you did or some experience that you used to convince the editors to to come up with your way?
Bella domanda. È una guerra, è
Nice
assolutamente una
question.
guerra con, sai, quei giubbotti
Well, it's a battle. It's a
italiani.
battle. It's a war. You have to wear mines and all these army uniforms where you can like bonsai something or well, it's a war where I find myself in a position which is a privileged point of view that besides being a graphic designer, I hate to be defined as an art director, but I'm a journalist. And this is very important in a magazine, and it has like a small army working in a magazine, and there's the editor, a chief editor, and a series of different people that have to follow through in this pyramid. Well, and of course, I'm not only a graphic designer, formally also, well, in terms of contract and everything, I have a power of decision which is different because I am a journalist and I have a certain freedom. And of course, like in everything, when you're convinced of what you do and you're very convinced of what you do, well, you have to, of course, go and face the battle. And in a weekly magazine and having the bar towards this project, which you believe is the right and withstand for you your ideas, it's a daily challenge with everyone. The journalists who don't understand that the picture they have done with a with the magazine, it's ugly. You cannot put a double page. Here I see Marta. There are so many challenges and so many battles, but the idea is that of be willing to stand up for your ideas and battle. Well, of course, if you're in a more privileged situation like mine, where you can raise your voice and say, I'm right, well, it works better. But the debate, the dialogue, well, works. And you have to convince everyone that that project works, not because you have to, but because you see it in the result. In a weekly magazine, the result speaks. Okay, in a monthly, a bit less. It's more rarefied, the impact. In a weekly, all weeks, you see what happens, and therefore, if it does work, everyone understands it. Everyone has, at the real beginning, we're not very happy of these projects, but now they're all more or less happy. Besides, they've understand at the beginning and the end, but what is important is that they have understood. No, questions from Mario is not fair. They're forbidden. It's a simple question, actually. Well, since you have a certain experience now on editorial projects for periodical magazines in a phase where periodical magazines are disappearing, well, I believe that in very many things that are done nowadays, well, they do not have work of imagination of a product with a new discovery, in the sense that many of the things we see in weekly magazines, periodical fashion periodicals and so periodics, well, they have this, they're going through this research of trying to find something that has been done already, but reinterpreting it. Like certain magazines like Twan, Nova, and so on have become, for a certain period of a few years ago, just practically some lighthouses to follow. And how much in your projects, in this case, in a sector that's so particular in editing, well, there's this dimension of starting from like a seed that existed, or rather just and reinterpreting it. Well, already in the 80s, in reality, there were some magazines that had a logic that was new, of total innovation, like The Face or things of this kind. And they were looking without having looked at the past. They were, rather, I see that the trend nowadays in the project of periodic magazines, well, is that of looking at the past to change it completely, but having this type of attention. If you can generate something new, it can be done by an acquired data and maybe forgotten. So going and digging in our archives. Well, it's not an easy question. The theme is pretty complex. I do not know if I really feel like answering. I believe it's all linked to the times, the period we're living in, the financial situation worldwide. I don't know if I'm exaggerating in my analysis. I think this looking at the past, it's an attitude that is common to very many different industries, the visual and not. And, well, said this, well, I hope it's not just this, because this is a problem, because it becomes a styling element. And when it becomes a styling element, well, it becomes an element of repetition. And therefore, if the process of Jesus was done for Rivista Studio or any other kind of independent magazine, well, most likely it would have been the usual project that gave us these things that we did, the usual for. So moving it of sense of a magazine that speaks of something totally different is one of the things that makes sense to me. Well, of course, that is a trend, and I also hope that it can finish, because we do need that break of the face and that have totally cut with the visual tradition, trying to use something new. And also in that case, the styling references that were there, like the typography, the shapes. Yes, from the constructivism onward, and the importance of innovating. And to me, the magazines, as I have lived this, the experience is not theoretical, and it all depends from the committant, and therefore the editorial projects is what actually creates the innovation, because it's very, very difficult to manage, even if in this case we tried to do so, to bring like the small seed towards a new magazine that was aesthetically totally new. If the editorial project is old, and if it has all the structures that are conceptually the structures of the magazine, that has always been like that. And here, if in a journalistic point of view there is a trial of innovation, then the graphic designer can interpret this in a stronger manner.
Non di religione, non so niente.
No religious questions. I know nothing about religion, please. Since you have mentioned the fact that a project is innovative only if there's a journalistic innovative idea, and before you have also spoken about the project that it's constructing some narrative formulas to give the journalist, well, I wanted to understand. And before you have also mentioned your role as a journalist as well, have they understood that was this perceived as a journalistic contribution that you gave, or did you needed to like convince them that you're working on the same level? This figure that has been that of the creative director and that of a journalist that has a visual competences or journalistic competences by a graphic designer is very new to them and never existed before. It's something that they treat me as if I'm moving like a crazy, and this. Just speaking about this, and it has not been digested totally, and these formats that we have proposed are some visual formats, and therefore I have proposed these as journalistic formats, and the one with the title there with the big writing, it's not something that wants to express the narration to make the reader make sure that he reads it. For them it becomes that element given to Mosè, just put in that, and we take the model A and it works. Then for the result it does work. What I would like them to do is to digest this and understand that some of these guidelines are journalistic guidelines to try to narrate. There are structures that narrate differently the same things. And therefore this is the storytelling basically. Any other question? Okay, well, we thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having presented these projects in a way that makes us understand that the work we do, we can call it graphic art direction. It's dealing a lot with things that are not the final shape. Thank you very much.